Okay, so today's video is going to be on mudras and bandhas, and I'm Shiprothim, by the way. I teach yoga. So mudras and bandhas are basically yogic locks, and mudras are yogic seals. So they're basically there to preserve yogic energy. How this works is that when you practice yoga, especially when you practice pranayam, a lot of pranic energy is generated. A lot of this heat energy, a lot of this electrical energy is generated in your body. And this energy in the form of electrical currents goes up and down your spine. And it's not exactly the same thing as, when you talk about Kundalini yoga and, the rising and coming down of currents. You're somewhere over there, okay? So it's a preliminary process. It's not the final thing. So the reason why mudras and bandhas are recommended is because I'm sorry, my little dog is distracting me here a bit, nibbling at my shoes. So the reason why mudras and bandhas are practiced is because it makes the process of the raising of these electrical currents much more safe, much more manageable, much more comfortable to feel, you know otherwise it can cause a lot of distress because, as I told you, it's just a building up of a lot of pranic energy, and you don't want too much of this unmanageable amount of energy, because if you don't know how to sort of like get out that excess amount of energy, it's going to be a problem. And let me not try to freak people out, but there have been stories where you know people have kind of like gone a bit cuckoos, momentarily, because that's the power of prana, that's the power of electricity. So does that mean anybody who practices pranayam and these asanas loses their minds? No, that's absolutely not true. If you practice it in the wrong way, for example, I knew a few people who practiced pranayam and asanas while smoking marijuana or while drinking and smoking cigarettes, you know, or while engaging in all kinds of stupid things like, you know, just unhealthy stuff that I really can't talk about. So that's why you have these yums and the niyams, which serves to kind of like manage these currents better. So when you push it further, from the yums and the niyams, the rules and regulations, you come to what's called mudras and bandhas. So the interesting thing about mudras and bandhas is that it's very close to uh, when we talk about what boundaries are. There's a lot of this talk about boundaries and narcissism and all of this stuff. Well, it's somewhat similar over here because the boundary being created when you do perform a mudra and a bandha is such that this excess amount of electricity, okay, and pranic current, life force, it doesn't get out of the body in such a manner that it causes this whole circuit. There are two nadis, and I explained this in my previous videos. One is the Ida and one is the Pingala nadi, the sun and the moon channel. Then you have the middle channel, which is Sushumna. So you don't want to mess up the workings, the smooth and harmonious workings of these two currents. So what you want to do is you want to get the current to go very smoothly along the middle line, the Sushumna Nadi. So if you don't perform these mudras and bandhas, there is a tendency for this prana to kind of like leak out of these places, these 9 gates in your body, because in yogic literature and in yogic texts, there are these 9 gates or the 9 jewels in the human body, and it's talked about especially in the Natha yogic literature, because Natha yogis were incredibly accomplished performers of yoga. They were said to have all kinds of supernatural powers. That's, just leave that aside. But they were very good when it came to the practice of yoga, and Natha, means to be a master. Okay, so they performed the kind of yoga that Shiv, taught to Parvati. So you have these 9 gates, okay, and if you don't seal these gates, the prana leaks out. And when the prana leaks out, it means that the current isn't smoothly going all the way up and coming down. So what that does is it in effect disturbs the natural and harmonious working, the natural and the harmonious rhythm of this flow, this up and going down of the electrical current. And when this is disturbed and when this is disharmonious, your mind will also be affected. When your mind is affected, your emotions will also be affected. When your emotions are affected, you will psychologically be affected as well. So it has these sort of like ramifications, like it's got a chain reaction sort of effect. So people don't really want to practice mudras and bandhas for many reasons. One is because they lack the knowledge, because they don't really know what mudras and bandhas are. Number two, people who do have the knowledge don't really know how to they don't know the actual technique. They don't know the actual esoteric processes, that requires the practitioner to move the energy in a certain way. And that's not the same thing as a kriya, because there is this whole talk about kriya, being moving is about moving, the energy is in your body. Yeah, that's just the beginning. That's a very basic idea of what a kriya is, because kriya means action. um Now, bandhas and mudras, basically a lock and a seal. The excess amount of prana is sealed up, is not allowed to seep through these 9 gates in the human body, okay? And you just learn to use energy more efficiently. Furthermore, what happens is that you create this protective barrier and this boundary around your body. This aura of yours is furthermore strengthened, okay? Now, the reason why yogis were said to be free from disease is also because of their practice of these mudras and bandhas, okay? So they had this strong boundary, this barrier. And in effect, they also created a boundary and a barrier against sort of like psychological energies as well. So, if they came across a person who kind of like had a tendency to, get inside people's personal space, get inside people's boundaries, so to speak, the yogi, the accomplished yogi, the one who's perfected the art of mudras and bandhas, and I gotta tell you that if you practicing mudras and bandhas is something that requires a constant effort, because if you leave it for like a month or two, especially as a beginner, you're gonna lose the effects. So you're gonna have to keep doing it, So after about 5 years, that's when you can be like, after 2 months, you could just be like, well, it's all right. I don't need to worry about any person breaking into my boundary. I've practiced for so long, it's there to stay. But if you're a beginner, no. So it creates that boundary. It creates an auric boundary. So another person's aura doesn't get inside unless you voluntarily allow that to happen, okay? So I actually spoke about this in my grounding video when I talked about the root chakra, and I talked about how the mudras and bandhas help in strengthening the root chakra, and how the pelvic area is in the form of a container, and how you have to be within the body, and sort of like, because people are not grounded, they tend to be out of the body and all over the place, and it brings you back to this physical kosha, annamaya kosha. I talked about all that. So in this video, I'm going to tell you guys further that, the boundary that you create is an energetic boundary. So it becomes even more important for you to practice mudras and bandhas if you want to safeguard yourself against, many types of energies that are there outside of you. Just like germs, there are so many germs outside of you, but you have the skin, you have your mucous membrane, which act as barriers, before they get inside. They have to go through this. So in the same way, when you practice mudras and bandhas, you're creating such a strong boundary that before anybody else's, negative energy comes in, or anybody else's personal energy, comes in, it's blocked because you have done a lock. And you don't allow your energy, your personal energy, to leak out because you have practiced mudras and bandhas. Bandha means lock, to close, okay? Mudra is seal. So let's say, you're allowing your energy to flow out of you. What happens to you? Naturally, you feel drained. You know, so you got to do the reverse, which is seal it back in. Don't allow it to go out. That's it. That's what practicing mudras and bandhas means at a psychological level. Okay? And since there's so much of this talk about narcissism and boundaries, listen, at the end of the day, nobody wants a lot of negative energy, right? Because it makes you weak. So why nobody wants negative energy? Because negativity is something that creates a kind of weakness in you. Positivity creates hope and strength. It opens your chest up. It gives you this feeling of brightness. You feel like, yeah, it's all good. And what does negativity do? You're not going to make it. You're a loser. You're hopeless. You'll never make it. You rather just go to your grave and just call it a day. That's what you are. You are nothing. You would never amount to be anything. You're absolutely nothing. And you can never do it. You think you can take you think you can overtake me? Huh? Is that what you think you are? And this is negativity. You better listen up when I'm talking to you. You are down there, I am up here. Don't you ever forget that. That is negativity. And what that does to a person is push the person down. So nobody wants that. So before you can allow the energy of such a person to invade the personal space of that person down below, it will be advisable for those people down below who don't have strong boundaries to practice mudras and bandhas. Because no matter what this person does, that person is not going to get affected. No matter what kind of negative energy there is outside, it won't go inside that person. But the problem with yoga in general, yoga being a moralistic science, what happens is that sometimes, along with yoga and many other spiritual sciences, or just being a human in general, we have feelings, we have compassion, we have like sort of empathy. So no matter how hard we practice mudras and bandhas and all of these things, somewhere deep down inside, when we really have compassion, we're going to open up. We're going to allow certain people inside that, is a risk to, so to speak, to allow inside. That's where you need to practice, discernment. That's where you need to bring that intellect in. And that intellect is emotional intelligence rather than logical intelligence. And this is where mudras and bandhas can also help you. Because what essentially happens in practicing mudras and bandhas is that the gates are closed. Okay, there are these 9 gates. And they are located at certain specific areas in your body. And one of them is over here, the emotional center. So I'm not going to tell you which bandha it is. I'm not going to tell you which mudra it is. But when you practice that, you lock this energy area over here. You lock it up. You don't allow anything to go in. Okay? And in opening yourself up to the other person or people or whatever, before you can even allow that to come in, there is a barrier. So you take it in, but you don't let that energy affect you. Okay? Because at this point, you can bring things in, but there is a filter. And that filter is your emotional intelligence, furthermore strengthened by another defense line, which is because of the practice of mudras and bandhas. Okay? Because even a filter needs a kind of a separate layer, a strong layer, in order to sort of like not allow these particles to come in. And you have those tiny openings, that's just about what you want to allow inside to come inside of you. So coming back to that grounding video that I did, that video on grounding, it's back to that same thing again, back to square one, which is to not allow yourself to be overwhelmed It is to sort of like just allow enough of that emotional input to come inside of you, and then let your intellect and the emotional intelligence to sort of like deal with that information, in a very, very reasonable way. Otherwise, what happens is that there are all kinds of fantastic things that people tend to start believing in, because they've just sort of like, there is no barrier, there's no discrimination, there's no filtration. People just take in whatever, just blindly just accept it without putting a barrier of skepticism and reason, you know or a boundary, just sort of like, when you put a boundary in this sense, it's emotional intelligence that's really coming into play. Okay, so the other thing that mudras and bandhas does is it gives you extraordinary physical strength, because for the most part, the mudras and bandhas takes in prana, and instead of causing it to sort of like just get dissipated, it gets bound up, right? And like an atom bomb, when you breathe out, that energy just moves out. And it moves out, giving the person an incredible release of energy, of all kinds of energy: psychic, emotional, physical, intellectual, all these kind of energies. It's just redoubled up, So that's why it's important for a person who's practicing mudras and bandhas to practice it well, because sometimes a wrong practice is a wrong practice. If you don't practice, I was just somebody had just told me about a particular, showed me a particular video about this person teaching Veerbhadrasan. So wrong. The foot, which is not the leg which is bent, but the leg that is extended. The foot is kept inclined at a degree of 45 degrees to give a sort of like a safety leverage to that bent knee. Because if that leverage is not there, and that person was saying, no, open your foot. He said, open your foot out in order to make the pose easier. And because he knew that people want to practice asanas in an easier way, and by practicing it in an easier way, they would probably come back to him more than a person who says, no, go through that pain and do it the right way. So he knew that, he's going to lose people if he's sort of like this. And BK Iyengar was like this. He was harsh, as a teacher. But you gotta tell the truth, whether it hurts or not. So he was telling them to move the foot out. So what happens when you do that in Veerbhadrasana is that the knee goes in like that. And that's bad. That could easily create a very bad hip injury. And that's the value of experience, because a lot of yoga, when you practice these asanas, is about physics. So in the same way, while you practice mudras and bandhas, you better know what you're doing and learn it from a person who knows. Now, this person probably had a lot of followers, okay, a lot. But that doesn't mean that they teach it in the right way. And that's where, again, when you practice mudras and bandhas, you get discernment. You put a barrier. You don't just believe everybody and everything. There's always going to be that healthy amount of skepticism. There's going to be this information that is going to be filtered. You're not going to be influenced that easily, Mudras and bandhas also allow you to practice pranayam much more safely, because prana, in effect, is a very lethal energy. Remember, it's electrical current. It's cosmic life force. So, there's a saying in Hatha Yoga Pradipika that you have to tame prana like how you would tame wild animals, with extreme care and caution. And that's how you also want to practice mudras and bandhas, with extreme care and caution, especially when you release that breath. Because you're holding breath and you're creating this atomic energy, atomic bomb sort of like, compression. Do you understand? So when you release that breath, it's like the atomic bomb. Okay? And that's why yogis can do these incredible things, these incredible, acts of they lift up these heavy stones, and they're able to stop a car with one hand. There was one yogi who lifted up a really heavy table just by biting his teeth with it. Then there were some yogis who memorized 100 pages of a book and just said it back again just after reading it once. These are the incredible achievements that can happen if you practice mudras, bandhas, and pranayamas to a certain extent. Not everybody can become like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or not everybody can become like Einstein. There has to be a certain amount of it depends on how far you push yourself. So I'm not saying you have to become like these people. There are definitely going to be some important benefits that are accrued through the practice of mudras and bandhas, and sometimes they're very fundamental to the practice, to the higher practices, especially when you practice the alternative breathing, the nadi shodha and pranayama, because you're directly playing with the ida and pingala nadi, the sun and the moon nadi, and you're affecting the sushumna channel. So if you don't practice mudras and bandhas, you're going to upset the workings of these two nadis, and it's just, you will not have control over your prana. Prana will have control over you. That's not a good situation to be in. Trust me. Okay? So, in the same way, when you don't have boundaries, you let the other person be in control of you. Do you understand? So when you do have boundaries, you dictate how you want to be treated, or how you want things to happen for you. You don't let the other person sort of like dictate you. It's going to be more or less at the same level as how every interaction should be. Energetic interaction is what I want to get at this point. So somebody asked me, so there's all this talk about creating a boundary, against narcissists, and this whole talk about narcissism, and all this stuff. So how do you do it? Look, first of all, I'm going to digress a bit from this video, because this video is about mudras and bandhas. Secondly, I'm going to tell you something. You got to let go of the fact that whether a person is a narcissist or not, that's not important. The very fixation on whether a person is a narcissist or not will create obsession, okay, which is as bad as the person being a narcissist. It's another form of a malady. Just be free. If you practice mudras and bandhas, that's one good step. The second step is to put a boundary, and that boundary also means to not allow this information of knowing whether a person is a narcissist or not. But what's more important is to know how energy interacts and how these mental energies are affecting you as a person, And the only thing you can do, because the person asked, what is the solution, if I'm with a narcissist, and this narcissist unfortunately happens to be my brother. So I'm like, well, that's difficult because you're living with your brother. I mean, you can't just walk away. What you can do is you can sort of like create an internal barrier, and that requires a bit of an effort. It requires more of a discipline. So let's say the person is just sort of like really undermining you, and is because typically what narcissists tend to do is narcissists are wounded people. They have deep inner traumas and wounds, and they have very, very low self-esteem. So they create this false sense of pride and self-esteem. So what they will do is they try to do that by being authoritative and stamping down on people who they perceive to be weaker than them, or in positions of weakness and not in positions of power. So I told this girl, well, assume a powerful position, put a damn boundary. If your brother thinks that you're a weak person and is stamping on your sense of self-worth, tell your brother to bugger off, but not literally, but in an energetic sense. Just go silent. Just go silent and see what happens. The brother will start thinking, wait, have I done something wrong? What did I do wrong? Because a lot of times people don't even know that they are narcissistic. Yeah, that's the thing. And you can't remember, you need to have compassion for these people, but not so much that you open up all defensive barriers for them to sort of like take advantage of it. So that's where you have to use emotional intelligence. You need to understand, okay, what is getting opened up in me and how that person's energy is interacting with mine, and is my sense of self-worth somewhere being compromised? Because a lot of times these people who we call narcissists know your weaknesses. They know you're in positions of weakness, so they take advantage of it. So mudras and bandhas obviously cuts that short. Because a narcissist, when they know they can't get something out of you, they will tend to just cut you off. They will tend to just sort of like, bye bye, you're no use to me. And they want to make you feel bad. Okay? That could create a reaction in you, because remember, narcissists also like to put people down. Okay? So again, it's a power play. It's about self-worth. It's about how who's got more self-worth and self-esteem. The narcissist always wants to feel above you and like they have more self-esteem. It's a pathological thing. It's because they have lacked that sense of self-esteem for a very long time, and could be childhood issues as well. So they block you out, they ignore you, and you're probably gonna be like, good God, because as it is, you have your boundaries open. You're gonna be like, God, did I do something wrong? Maybe I should change the way I behave towards this person, so that he or she can re-accept me. I hope I didn't offend this person. And that's the mistake. Because you don't want to be like, okay, I don't care what happens, what this person does, whether this person completely loses me, whether I lose this person, whether this person just detaches from me and does his or her own thing and just completely ignores me. That's the chance many people who don't have strong boundaries are willing to do. Because the narcissist has basically projected his or her sense of worthlessness onto you. And by doing this, they feel good about themselves. And after they have done that, they're out. They bail, leaving you feeling like shit. So basically, that's how it works. It's a power play. So what you need to do is you need to create a strong barrier, a strong boundary. And it's not easy. Let me tell you something. It's very difficult. This establishing a boundary in this mental way is what's suggested a lot, by many people. The other thing is the mudras and bandhas, which is a very physical and energetic practice. It's more direct, and it's difficult because, like I told you before, you have to know how to do it. Because a wrong practice can easily, create a kind of debilitation in your nerves, where instead of strengthening you and creating stronger boundaries, it does the opposite. So here are a few pointers on how to practice mudras and bandhas properly. First of all, always be within your limit when you're holding in your breath. First of all, try to practice asanas first and master them before practicing mudras and bandhas. And many of you at this point might be like, well, I don't even need to do mudras and bandhas. It sounds too complicated. You're right. It actually is. And in fact, the method of establishing boundaries, as suggested by many people and many psychologists, is in fact as difficult. They're both difficult. You gotta put in some effort. It's because you're not putting in the effort. It's because you haven't really. It's difficult to put a boundary, because of the consequences. You might lose the person, or the person might just walk away from you, or sort of, because that's how they are. They might not give a damn about you, and that will be like sort of like you being left out in the open, cold, in the snow. Okay, you feel abandoned, because in fact they are the ones who face abandonment issues, and by doing this to you, they feel good about themselves. It's not something that they do intentionally. It's a very instinctive thing. It's sort of like this animal kingdom sort of predator prey sort of thing going on, and it's very complicated. So I'm going to cut it short. Hold your breath in for as long as you feel comfortable, and just slightly push that boundary of feeling, a bit uncomfortable, but very slightly, maybe a second. Release your breath without opening the locks. For example, there is a neck lock, the Jalandhar Bandh, which is sort of like you lock this portion over here. A lot of times I've seen people make this mistake, is that so they've taken in the breath, they've held it in, and so when they breathe out, they let this go and they breathe out. There is no use in performing that lock in that sense. It's gone, the effect is gone. The power comes in practicing this lock. When you hold your breath in, you create a firm boundary. This is emotional strength. When your chest is lifted, it's emotional power. Okay? You lock it, and when you release it, you keep this raised and you release. When you do this, when you release it this way, and you now release the lock, you feel this area has not gone down, because when this area goes down, you get depression, you get low self-esteem, you become timid. And a lot of times, for example, I'll give you one example. The reason why I tend to my natural posture is sort of like straight. I tend to walk straight, and I tend to sort of like walk with my chest open. But I notice that sometimes people outside tend to look at me a lot, because that becomes very imposing. That presence is too imposing. Because every time I walk into, when I used to just naturally, do this and walk into a room, or into a supermarket. I just did that. In fact, today I went to a supermarket and I practiced Mudras and Bandhas. Everybody's looking at me, and I don't like that attention. Because it's just like, I want to do my own thing. I want to focus on what I need to show up on. So it's just extra effort, because people are looking at you and you're sort of like, can you please give me way? I need to kind of like go, but they're just sort of staring at you, and you got to like go like this and that. You don't want too much of magnetism. You just don't. So what I do, and that's part of where yoga teaches you humility. There's also a technical side to this. You remove the pride and you just be a normal person. You walk like a normal person, but when you have to use that power and magnetism, you do it. Especially in confronting, when you have to sort of like put a boundary, with certain people, or with a certain group, or a certain topic, or whatever it is that will eventually debilitate your energetic field, So, I'm going to end this video over here. But I'm also going to I left you with that very important tip, which is never push your limits when it comes to controlling your breath. Even when you practice pranayama, do it always within your limit. So even the whole thing of being confident, don't be overconfident, because it becomes pride, and that's not a good thing. Just have the right balance, and that's very difficult to achieve, actually. And the other thing I want to tell you about mudras and bandhas in practicing them is that, yeah, sure, it might be difficult to find certain teachers who know how this works and who can teach you the right method of, practicing these locks. Well, there is an inner teacher, and I'm sure if you put in a good effort, and if you really want to learn, God will provide you with that knowledge. It is generally more beneficial to get professional, help. But even then, the knowledge just comes, Once your mind starts opening up slowly, it's just sort of like trinklets, it's like droplets of knowledge just coming in, and, the work will be done. When you practice Mool Bandha, which is the most basic yogic lock that I've talked about so much in my previous videos on grounding, keep the body firm when you hold your breath in. Don't let any part loose. And especially when you release the breath, that's when you absolutely have to maintain that rigidity, because when you do that, that is the very precise moment where the energetic field opens up, and you are voluntarily closing it in. You're closing those 9 gates in, but you're letting the breath go out. And when you do that, the breath has gone out, but this energetic field has not opened up. It's closed in. So when the breath goes out, you breathe in again, and the energetic field expands. And then you hold your breath, right? And then you have to breathe out again. Don't let it loose. Keep it over here and release the breath. And then when you breathe in again and hold your breath, this is what happens. It expands even more. And then release your breath again. And when you release it, at this point, when the expansion cannot go beyond a certain point, that's where your Kundalini energy, that's where the minutest sort of like sparks of electricity start to sort of like go up and down your spine. That's where you have to very minutely release your breath. And that's when you will feel this current going up. And at that point, you become the controller of your life force energy. And it's at that point that you need to really pay attention. So by keeping your body and your mind firm and alert, and by not losing attention, you breathe out, okay? And then you have this boundary intact. Because a lot of times when you breathe out, the boundary just sort of like, it just gets eliminated. Now, a lot of people, I've noticed that people who have strong boundaries, for example, it's not really a boundary, it's a wall. It's a wall of, it's only what I say matters, and what anybody else says, if it doesn't resonate with me, it's stupid. So, I mean, there's a difference between arrogance and, having a strong boundary. But there are many, many more secrets to be talked about when we're talking about mudras and bandhas. I just did this video because I found it very interesting after hearing people talking about boundaries and narcissism, and I was like, wow, these people are talking things like, self-worth and, how to keep things contained. And I was like, well, I did a video on this, on grounding, and I talked about the pelvic region. I talked about sealing and energies. I talked about, not letting stuff just get out loose, just sort of like having a good grip on your consciousness, right? And I was like, wow, okay, this is very interesting. So those yogis knew what they were doing when they were talking about, bandha. Bandh means to close, lock, right? And mudra, which is seal, which is basically creating a boundary. And I inadvertently talked about this in that grounding video. And I thought, okay, let me do a bit of an extension over here. So thank you for joining me in this video, and I will see you guys next time on another video. And like this video if you do, subscribe to this channel, and goodbye for now.